The Learjet 35 business jet maintains a perfect cruise at 41,000 feet, its autopilot guiding it smoothly across the afternoon sky. Below, the landscape of the American Midwest scrolls past, farmland and small towns forming geometric patterns visible from 8 miles up. Inside the cabin, 6 passengers should be relaxing, working, or dozing during the flight from Oklahoma to South Dakota. But something is terribly wrong. Nobody aboard is moving. Nobody is conscious. The pilots do not respond to radio calls. The passengers do not look out windows. The aircraft has become a flying tomb, carrying 7 people who can no longer help themselves, flying on autopilot toward a destination none of them will ever reach. Air traffic controllers have been trying to make contact for 20 minutes. Dozens of calls on multiple frequencies produce only silence. Fighter jets have been scrambled, climbing rapidly to intercept this ghost ship in the sky. The pilots will position their aircraft alongside the business jet, close enough to see through the windows, and what they report will send chills through everyone monitoring the situation. The cockpit is empty. Both pilot seats are vacant. No one is at the controls. Through the cabin windows, they can see motionless figures slumped in seats. Nobody moving. Nobody responding. The Learjet continues flying northwest on autopilot, fuel slowly draining from its tanks, heading toward the moment when the engines will flame out and the aircraft will fall from the sky. Before I reveal what happened aboard this flight and how it ended, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is one of the most mysterious and tragic incidents in aviation history, and what investigators discovered changed how we think about pressurization and hypoxia. I am Captain Paul Henderson. In 25 years of commercial aviation, I have dealt with countless emergencies and system failures. But hypoxia, the gradual loss of oxygen that slowly shuts down your brain, is perhaps the most insidious threat we face. Because it does not announce itself with warning bells or flashing lights, it creeps up silently, stealing your consciousness while convincing you that everything is fine. Your judgment fails before you realize you need help. Your vision narrows before you notice something is wrong, and then you simply slip away, unaware that you are dying. This is the story of the Learjet 35 registration November 47 Bravo Alpha, the ghost flight that captivated and horrified the nation as it flew for hours with everyone aboard incapacitated, and the investigation that revealed a simple mechanical failure with devastating consequences. Welcome aboard, October 25, 1999, a Monday morning. Orlando Sanford International Airport in Florida. The sun shines brightly over central Florida, temperatures already climbing toward 80 degrees. At the General Aviation Terminal, a Learjet 35 business jet is being prepared for a charter flight. The aircraft is registered November 47 Bravo Alpha, a 10-passenger business jet operated by a charter company. It is a relatively new aircraft, well-maintained, with no outstanding mechanical issues. The Learjet 35 is a popular business jet, known for reliability and performance, capable of flying at high altitudes where the air is smooth and fuel efficiency is optimal. The passengers for this flight are professional golfers and their associates heading to a tournament in South Dakota. The most notable passenger is Payne Stewart, one of the most recognizable names in professional golf. Stewart is 42 years old at the peak of his career, having recently won the United States Open Championship just 4 months earlier. He is known not just for his golfing prowess, but for his distinctive style, often wearing knickers and a flat cap in tribute to golf's traditional origins. He is beloved by fans, respected by fellow players, a true gentleman of the game. Also aboard are Stewart's agents Robert Fraley and Van Arden, both accomplished businessmen who represent multiple professional athletes. Golf course designer Bruce Borland is traveling with them to discuss a potential course development project. 2 pilots will fly them to South Dakota. Captain Michael Kling occupies the left seat. He is 43 years old with over 4,000 hours of flight time. He is experienced, professional, holds appropriate ratings for the Learjet. First Officer Stephanie Bellegarrigue sits in the right seat. She is 27 years old with approximately 1,600 hours total time. She is less experienced than the captain, but fully qualified for this operation. Both pilots are competent professionals with clean records and solid reputations. The flight plan calls for a departure from Orlando Sanford, climbing to 41,000 feet, then flying northwest to Aberdeen, South Dakota. Flight time is estimated at approximately 2.5 hours. The weather is excellent along the entire route, with clear skies and light winds. Nothing about this flight suggests any problems. It should be a routine charter, the kind of flight these pilots have completed hundreds of times before. At 9:19 in the morning Eastern Time, the Learjet pushes back from its parking position at the general aviation ramp. The pilots start both Garrett turbofan engines, the distinctive whine of the small jets rising as they spool up to idle power. They complete their after-start checklists, receive taxi clearance from ground control, and begin rolling toward the departure runway. Tower clears them for takeoff at 9:27. Captain Kling advances the thrust levers. The Learjet, light and powerful, accelerates rapidly down the runway. At rotation speed, he pulls back on the yoke. The nose lifts sharply. The main gear leaves the pavement, and November 47 Bravo Alpha is airborne, climbing steeply into the Florida morning. The departure is normal, professional, exactly as it should be. They follow their assigned departure procedure, communicating clearly with air traffic control, climbing steadily toward their cruising altitude. The Learjet climbs quickly, its powerful engines pushing it upward at over 4,000 feet per minute. In the cabin, passengers settle in for the flight. Payne Stewart, relaxed and smiling, chats with his companions about the upcoming tournament and the course design project. At 9:33, just 6 minutes after takeoff, they check in with Jacksonville Center as they pass through 23,000 feet. Jacksonville Center, Learjet, November 47 Bravo Alpha is with you, climbing through flight level 230. Learjet, November 47, Bravo Alpha, Jacksonville Center, roger. Climb and maintain flight level 390. Climb and maintain 390, November 47 Bravo Alpha. First Officer Beligarig's voice is clear, professional, showing no signs of distress or concern. Flight level 390 is 39,000 feet, just 2,000 feet below their final cruising altitude of 41,000. The Learjet continues climbing, the autopilot smoothly guiding the aircraft upward through the thin air of high altitude. Inside the cockpit, both pilots monitor the climb, watching engine instruments, scanning flight displays, maintaining the professional vigilance that has kept them safe through thousands of hours of flying. At 9:38, Jacksonville Center clears them to their final altitude. Learjet, November 47 Bravo Alpha, climb and maintain flight level 410. There is no response. The controller waits a reasonable time, perhaps 15 seconds, then tries again. Learjet, November 47 Bravo Alpha, Jacksonville Center, climb and maintain flight level 410. Still nothing. The silence is unusual, concerning. Aircraft do not simply stop responding in mid-conversation. The controller tries a third time, speaking more slowly and clearly. Learjet, November 47 Bravo Alpha, Jacksonville Center, if you read, climb and maintain flight level 410 and acknowledge. The Learjet continues flying, visible on the controller's radar screen, but there is no response on the radio. No acknowledgement. No indication that anyone aboard heard the transmission. The controller switches to the emergency frequency, the guard frequency that all aircraft are required to monitor. Learjet, November 47 Bravo Alpha, Jacksonville Center on guard. How do you read? Silence. Just the soft hiss of static through the speakers. The controller feels the first flutter of real concern in his chest. Something is wrong with this flight. He notifies his supervisor. They discuss the situation briefly. The supervisor suggests trying to raise the aircraft through other means. The controller asks another aircraft flying in the same general area to attempt contact on air-to-air frequencies. The other pilot tries, his transmission going out on the frequency. All aircraft monitor for inter-aircraft communication. Learjet, November 47 Bravo Alpha. This is Delta 726 on 121.5. Do you read? Nothing. No response. Controllers implement the next level of protocol. They attempt to send data link messages through the aircraft's onboard communication systems, text messages that should appear on cockpit displays. The messages are transmitted. They arrive at the aircraft. But there is no acknowledgement, no response, no indication that anyone in the cockpit is reading them. At 9:44, just 16 minutes after the last confirmed radio contact, the situation is escalated to emergency status. The North American Aerospace Defense Command is notified. An aircraft has lost all radio contact and is not responding to any attempts at communication. NORAD immediately scrambles fighter jets. This is 1999, but the memory of previous incidents involving unresponsive aircraft is still fresh in the minds of military commanders. An aircraft that does not respond is a potential threat that must be investigated immediately. Two F-16 Fighting Falcons launch from Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, their powerful engines pushing them skyward at tremendous speed. They climb rapidly toward the Learjet's altitude, their mission clear. Intercept, make visual contact, determine what is happening aboard the business jet. The Learjet continues flying northwest, the autopilot maintaining its programmed course and altitude with computer precision. On radar screens across multiple air traffic control facilities, controllers watch the target representing November 47, Bravo Alpha move steadily across their displays. The aircraft is maintaining perfect altitude and heading. There are no erratic movements, no signs of distress, no emergency transponder codes. It is simply flying normally, but not responding to anyone. At 10:08, the fighter jets reach the Learjet. The lead F-16 pilot, his call sign Gladiator 01, positions his aircraft alongside the business jet, close enough to see clearly through the windows. He is perhaps 50 feet away, flying in close formation, his eyes scanning the Learjet for any signs of what might be wrong. What he sees makes his blood run cold. He keys his radio, his voice controlled but tight with tension. Control, Gladiator 01 has visual contact with the Learjet. The cockpit windshield appears to be frosted over or covered with condensation. I cannot see the pilots clearly, but I see no movement in the cockpit, no response to my presence. He maneuvers his fighter slightly, moving aft to look through the passenger cabin windows. Moving to check the cabin, I can see figures in the seats. They appear motionless. No one is looking out the windows. No acknowledgement of my aircraft. I see no signs of consciousness aboard the Learjet. This information is relayed immediately to NORAD Command, to the Federal Aviation Administration Command Center, to the charter company that operates the aircraft. The worst fears are confirmed. Everyone aboard appears to be unconscious or dead. The Learjet has become a ghost ship, flying itself across the country with no one able to control it. If you are as disturbed by this as I am, go ahead and hit that like button right now. And make sure you stay subscribed, because what happens over the next 4 hours is one of the most tragic spectacles in aviation history. Share this video because understanding hypoxia and pressurization failures is critical for everyone who flies. The Learjet continues flying northwest, the autopilot faithfully maintaining heading and altitude. The fighter jets follow, one on each side, the pilots watching helplessly as the business jet flies deeper into the American heartland. They report periodically on what they see, describing the frosted windshield, the motionless figures in the cabin, the complete lack of response to their presence. The frosted windshield is a critical clue. At 41,000 feet, the outside air temperature is approximately -65 degrees Fahrenheit. If the cabin loses pressurization, if the warm pressurized air inside escapes and is replaced by the frigid air from outside, moisture will immediately condense and freeze on cold surfaces like windows. The frosted windshield tells investigators and military commanders that the cabin is not pressurized, that everyone aboard is being exposed to the deadly environment of high altitude. At 41,000 feet, the atmospheric pressure is only about 3 pounds per square inch, less than 1/4 of the pressure at sea level. The oxygen content in the thin air is so low that a person will lose consciousness within 15 to 30 seconds. Without supplemental oxygen, without a pressurized cabin, survival at this altitude is measured in minutes at best. On the ground, news of the situation spreads rapidly. Media outlets pick up the story from monitoring emergency radio frequencies and military communications. Television networks begin covering it live. Payne Stewart is a public figure, one of the most recognizable athletes in America. The image of his aircraft flying across the country with everyone aboard incapacitated captures public attention in a way few aviation incidents do. By mid-morning, every major news network is broadcasting continuous coverage. Cameras on the ground capture footage of the Learjet flying overhead, the fighter jets in close formation on either side. The sight is surreal, haunting. A small business jet flying perfectly straight and level, escorted by military fighters, everyone aboard beyond help. Stewart's wife, Tracy, learns of the situation from a phone call from a family friend who saw it on television. She turns on the news and watches in horror as networks show live footage of the Learjet. As reporters speculate about what might have happened, as military officials confirm that everyone aboard appears incapacitated. She knows her husband is on that aircraft. She knows that by the time she is watching this, he is almost certainly already dead. The aircraft continues northwest for hours, crossing state after state. Florida to Georgia to Tennessee, to Kentucky to Missouri to Iowa to South Dakota. The fighter jets are relieved by fresh aircraft as their fuel runs low, a continuous escort maintaining visual contact with the ghost flight. Controllers track the Learjet on radar, calculating fuel consumption based on the aircraft's weight and speed, estimating when the engines will flame out. Inside the Learjet, Payne Stewart and his companions are almost certainly already dead, though the fighter pilots cannot confirm this from their vantage point outside the aircraft. The passengers sit motionless in their seats, seatbelts still fastened, perhaps never even realizing they were in danger. Hypoxia at high altitude is painless, almost gentle in its final stages. You feel euphoric, peaceful. You simply lose consciousness and slip away. There is no struggle, no panic, no pain. The pilots, Captain Kling and First Officer Belegarig, likely had slightly more warning than the passengers. They would have seen warning lights on the pressurization panel, heard warning tones, noticed the cabin altitude rising on their instruments. They may have attempted to troubleshoot the problem, to determine why the cabin was not pressurizing properly. But hypoxia affects judgment before consciousness. They may have been too impaired to recognize the severity of the situation, too confused to take the immediate action required to save themselves. The proper response to a pressurization failure at high altitude is immediate and unequivocal. You don your oxygen mask first before doing anything else. You do not troubleshoot, you do not check checklists, you do not discuss options. You reach for your mask, pull it over your face, ensure it is sealed and providing oxygen, then you declare an emergency and begin an immediate descent to 10,000 feet or below. But if you hesitate even briefly, if you spend 15 or 20 seconds trying to understand what is wrong before donning the mask, you may already be too impaired to save yourself. Hypoxia steals your ability to think clearly, to make good decisions, to recognize danger. It convinces you that you are fine, even as your brain is shutting down from lack of oxygen. At approximately 12:11 in the afternoon Central Time, nearly 4 hours after the last radio contact, the Learjet's engines begin to fail. First, the right engine flames out as the last fuel is consumed from its tank, then seconds later, the left engine follows. The aircraft is now a glider, beginning its final descent toward the earth below with no power, no thrust, nothing to keep it airborne except the lift from its wings and the forward momentum it still carries. The fighter pilots watch as the Learjet begins descending, the autopilot attempting to maintain control even without engine power. The nose drops slightly as airspeed begins to decay. The aircraft enters a gentle spiral, the autopilot trying to maintain coordinated flight, but gradually losing the battle against aerodynamics and gravity. Below is rural South Dakota, farmland and prairie stretching to the horizon in every direction. There are no cities, no major population centers nearby, just open country dotted with small farms and ranch houses. The fighter pilots report the Learjet's descent, providing constant updates on altitude and position to controllers tracking on radar. At approximately 12:14 in the afternoon, the Learjet impacts an open field near Mena, South Dakota, roughly 20 miles from Aberdeen, which was the intended destination. The aircraft is in a steep nose-down attitude when it strikes the ground, traveling at high speed. The impact is catastrophic, instantaneous, unsurvivable. The Learjet disintegrates on contact with the earth. The fuselage breaks into dozens of pieces. The wings separate and tumble across the field. The engines tear free and gouge deep craters in the soil. Wreckage scatters across a wide area, some pieces thrown hundreds of feet from the main impact point. Fire erupts immediately, though there is little fuel remaining in the tanks to burn. What does ignite creates a column of black smoke visible for miles. All 7 people aboard die on impact. Payne Stewart, Robert Fraley Van Arden, Bruce Borland, Captain Michael Kling, First Officer Stephanie Belegarig, and 1 additional passenger whose name was not as widely publicized. Their deaths are instantaneous, though in truth they had almost certainly been dead for hours before the crash. Victims of hypoxia long before the aircraft ran out of fuel and fell from the sky. Emergency responders from nearby communities reached the crash site within 30 minutes. Volunteer fire departments, county sheriffs, state patrol officers, all converging on the remote field where the Learjet fell. But there is nothing they can do. The wreckage is scattered across a large area, the aircraft completely destroyed. There are no survivors to rescue, no injured to treat, no hope of finding anyone alive. They can only secure the scene, keep back the curious onlookers who are already arriving, and wait for federal investigators. The investigation that follows is exhaustive and meticulous. The National Transportation Safety Board leads the inquiry, assisted by Learjet, the engine manufacturers, and numerous aviation safety experts. Investigators face a challenging task. The aircraft was destroyed on impact. Much of the wreckage is badly damaged, twisted and broken beyond easy recognition. But they must determine what caused everyone aboard to become incapacitated, what mechanical failure or human error led to this tragedy. The wreckage is carefully documented, photographed from every angle, then transported to a hangar where it can be examined in detail. Investigators lay out the pieces, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, trying to reconstruct the aircraft and understand what failed. The first major clue, as I mentioned earlier, came from the fighter pilot reports during the flight. The cockpit windshield was frosted or covered with condensation. This is highly significant. At high altitude, if the cabin loses pressurization, the temperature inside drops dramatically to match the frigid air outside. Moisture in the air, exhaled by the occupants or present in the cabin atmosphere, condenses instantly and freezes on cold surfaces. The frosted windshield strongly suggests the cabin was not pressurized, that the interior of the aircraft had been exposed to the deadly environment of 41,000 feet. Investigators focus intensely on the pressurization system. In a Learjet 35, cabin pressure is maintained by bleeding hot, compressed air from the engines. This bleed air is cooled, filtered, and pumped into the cabin. A series of valves and control systems regulate the flow of air into the cabin and the release of air through outflow valves to maintain proper pressure differential. The system is designed to maintain a cabin altitude of approximately 8,000 feet, even when the aircraft is flying at 41,000 feet actual altitude. This provides a comfortable environment with sufficient oxygen for passengers and crew to breathe normally without supplemental oxygen. But if the pressurization system fails, if bleed air stops flowing into the cabin, or if the outflow valves fail to close properly allowing air to escape, the cabin altitude will rise rapidly to match the outside altitude. At 41,000 feet, this happens quickly within a minute or two, and once the cabin reaches high altitude, everyone aboard has perhaps 20 seconds before losing consciousness. The investigation focuses on recovering and examining every component of the pressurization system from the wreckage. Pumps, valves, ducting, control systems, sensors, everything is carefully extracted from the twisted metal and brought to laboratories for detailed analysis. What they discover is both simple and tragic. The pressurization system uses bleed air from both engines, controlled by a series of valves. One critical valve is the bleed air valve, which controls the flow of high-pressure air from the engine compressor section into the pressurization system. This valve must be open for the system to function. The investigation determines that the bleed air valve was found in the closed position. With this valve closed, no pressurized air could flow into the cabin. The pressurization system would have been unable to maintain cabin pressure as the aircraft climbed. As the Learjet ascended through 20,000 feet, then 30,000, then 40,000, the cabin altitude would have risen in lockstep with the aircraft altitude. But why was the valve closed? This becomes the critical question. Was it a mechanical failure? Did the valve fail and close on its own? Or was it closed by the crew, perhaps during pre-flight or maintenance, and never reopened? The investigation cannot determine definitively why the valve was closed. The valve itself was damaged in the crash, making it impossible to determine whether it failed mechanically or was manually positioned. But investigators note that the bleed air valve can be manually controlled by the crew, and that there are circumstances during pre-flight or maintenance when the crew might close this valve temporarily. One scenario the investigation considers is that the valve was closed during pre-flight for some reason, perhaps to perform a system check or to isolate a suspected problem, and then the crew forgot to reopen it before takeoff. This would be a catastrophic oversight, but it is possible, especially if the crew was distracted or interrupted during their pre-flight procedures. Another scenario is that the valve failed mechanically during the climb, closing unexpectedly and cutting off bleed air to the pressurization system. This would also be catastrophic, but it would not be the result of crew error. The investigation cannot determine which scenario occurred. The evidence is ambiguous. What is clear is that the bleed air valve was closed, that no air was flowing to the pressurization system, and that everyone aboard lost consciousness due to hypoxia, as the cabin altitude rose to match the aircraft altitude. The investigation also examines why the crew did not respond to the pressurization problem before becoming incapacitated. The aircraft was equipped with multiple warning systems designed to alert pilots to pressurization issues. There are warning lights on the pressurization panel. There are audible warnings that sound when cabin altitude exceeds 10,000 feet. There is a master caution light and tone that activates for numerous abnormal conditions, including pressurization problems. The cockpit voice recorder, recovered from the wreckage and analyzed in detail, provides some answers. The recording captures the normal sounds of the cockpit during takeoff and initial climb. The pilots communicate with air traffic control, run through checklists, discuss the flight plan. Everything sounds routine, professional, normal. Then, at approximately 9:36, about 9 minutes after takeoff as the aircraft climbs through approximately 38,000 feet, a warning tone sounds. It is brief, just a few seconds. One of the pilots, investigators cannot determine which one from the audio quality, says something that sounds like, "What's that?" or "Check that." But there is no follow-up discussion, no troubleshooting, no recognition of what the warning means. 15 seconds later, the tone sounds again, longer this time. Again, there is no clear response from the crew. Perhaps they are looking at instruments, trying to determine what triggered the warning. Perhaps they are already impaired by hypoxia, their judgment degraded, their ability to process information compromised. After this, the cockpit voice recorder captures increasingly garbled, slurred speech. The pilots are trying to communicate, but their words are unclear, difficult to understand. This is consistent with hypoxia. As oxygen deprivation worsens, speech becomes slurred and confused. Thoughts become disorganized. The ability to form coherent sentences fails. The last clear sound on the cockpit voice recorder is approximately 90 seconds after the first warning tone. After that, there are only mechanical sounds. The hum of engines, the rush of air, the occasional click of relays or switches operating automatically. There are no more voices, no more human sounds. Just the aircraft flying itself, while everyone aboard has succumbed to hypoxia. The investigation determines the probable cause of the accident to be incapacitation of the flight crew due to hypoxia resulting from a loss of cabin pressurization. The reason for the pressurization loss was the closed position of the bleed air valve, though the investigation could not determine why the valve was closed or whether it failed mechanically or was inadvertently left closed by the crew. Contributing factors include the rapid onset of hypoxia at high altitude, which left the crew with insufficient time to recognize the problem and take corrective action before becoming impaired. The investigation notes that at 40,000 feet, the time of useful consciousness after sudden decompression is approximately 15 to 20 seconds. If the crew did not immediately recognize the pressurization problem and don oxygen masks within that brief window, they would have lost consciousness before they could save themselves or their passengers. The National Transportation Safety Board makes several safety recommendations based on their findings. Aircraft manufacturers should improve warning systems for pressurization failures, making them more obvious, more distinctive, harder to ignore or misinterpret. The warnings should be impossible to confuse with other, less critical alerts. Pilot training should place greater emphasis on the dangers of hypoxia and the critical importance of immediate action when pressurization problems are suspected. Pilots should be trained in altitude chambers where they can experience mild hypoxia under controlled conditions, learning to recognize the symptoms in themselves so they can respond more quickly if it occurs during flight. Oxygen mask designs should be improved to make them easier to don quickly, even when cognitive function is already degraded by early hypoxia. The mask should be positioned for instant access, and the procedure for donning them should be so simple that it can be accomplished even with impaired judgment and motor skills. Pressurization system designs should include additional redundancy and fail-safe features. Critical valves like bleed air valves should have position indicators clearly visible to pilots. There should be multiple independent systems to alert crews to pressurization problems, with warnings that cannot be missed or ignored. For the families of those who died, the investigation findings provide some closure but little comfort. Their loved ones did not suffer. Hypoxia at high altitude is not painful. There is no feeling of suffocation, no panic, no agony. You simply feel increasingly tired and peaceful as your brain shuts down from lack of oxygen. You lose consciousness and never wake. But they died in a preventable accident, killed by a mechanical failure or procedural oversight that should have been survivable if recognized and addressed within the critical 15-second window. For the golf world and the broader sports community, Payne Stewart's death is a tremendous loss. He was at the absolute peak of his career, having won the United States Open just months before. He had many more years of championship golf ahead of him, likely more major victories, possibly induction into the World Golf Hall of Fame as one of the greatest players of his generation. He was also a role model, a devout Christian who spoke openly about his faith, a devoted family man, and a gentleman who treated everyone with respect and kindness. His death, occurring in such a tragic and public way, shocks not just the golf world, but the entire nation. Millions of people watch the coverage on television as the Learjet flies for hours across the country, knowing that everyone aboard is beyond help, waiting for the inevitable moment when the fuel will run out and the aircraft will fall. It is a slow-motion tragedy, unfolding over hours on live television, creating an image that will haunt American consciousness for years. The image of fighter jets escorting a doomed aircraft, of a business jet flying itself across half the country with 7 dead people aboard, becomes one of the most powerful and disturbing spectacles in aviation history. It raises uncomfortable questions about the vulnerability of pressurization systems, about the narrow margin between life and death at high altitude, about how quickly a routine flight can become a tragedy. The field where the Learjet fell is private farmland, owned by a family who had no connection to aviation or to Payne Stewart. The impact crater is eventually filled in, the wreckage removed, the scorched earth plowed under. The field returns to agricultural use, growing crops each year, marked only by the memories of those who witnessed the tragedy and by a small memorial placed nearby by Stewart's fans and family. The wreckage itself, after being thoroughly examined by investigators, is eventually destroyed to prevent it from becoming a morbid curiosity or being sold as macabre souvenirs. The practice of destroying wreckage after investigation is now standard, ensuring that pieces of aircraft that carried people to their deaths do not end up displayed in private collections or sold on the internet. Payne Stewart's family establishes a foundation in his memory, supporting junior golf programs and providing scholarships to young golfers who demonstrate not just athletic ability, but also the character and sportsmanship that Stewart embodied. His widow Tracy becomes an advocate for aviation safety, speaking publicly about the need for better pressurization systems and improved hypoxia training. The investigation findings lead to tangible improvements in aviation safety. Enhanced pressurization. Warning systems are developed and installed in business jets. Altitude chamber training becomes more common for pilots of high-altitude aircraft. Oxygen delivery systems are redesigned to be more reliable and easier to use in emergencies. But perhaps the most important legacy of this tragedy is increased awareness among pilots of the deadly danger of hypoxia. Every pilot who trains on high-altitude aircraft now learns about the Learjet November 47 Bravo Alpha, about how quickly hypoxia can incapacitate even experienced crews, about the absolute necessity of immediate action when pressurization problems occur. For me, as a pilot who regularly flies at high altitudes, this accident reinforces lessons that I work hard never to forget. First, pressurization is not a convenience, it is life support. At 40,000 feet, you are in an environment as hostile to human life as the vacuum of space. Without pressure and oxygen, you have seconds to live, not minutes. Second, the time to recognize and respond to pressurization problems is measured in seconds. At 41,000 feet, you have perhaps 15 to 20 seconds of useful consciousness after sudden decompression. That is barely enough time to reach for your oxygen mask and get it on. There is no time for troubleshooting, no time for discussion, no time to finish what you are doing. The mask goes on first, immediately, before anything else. Then you can troubleshoot. Then you can run checklists. Then you can declare an emergency and descend. But the mask comes first, or you will be unconscious before you can save yourself. Third, hypoxia training is essential. Every pilot should experience mild hypoxia in a controlled environment so they learn to recognize the symptoms. Euphoria, impaired judgment, tingling in extremities, tunnel vision, slowed reactions, loss of color perception. If you know what hypoxia feels like, you have a slightly better chance of recognizing it early and taking action before you lose the ability to save yourself. Only slightly better, because hypoxia by its nature impairs your ability to recognize that you are impaired. But training helps. Fourth, discipline in executing emergency procedures is critical. When that pressurization warning sounds, the response must be automatic, immediate, without hesitation. Reach for the mask, pull it on, verify oxygen flow, declare emergency, descend immediately. Do not think, do not analyze, do not troubleshoot first. Just execute the procedure that you have trained for, because seconds count and hesitation kills. The ghost flight of Learjet November 47 Bravo Alpha remains one of the most haunting incidents in aviation history. 7 people died, including one of America's most beloved sports figures, in an accident that was both preventable and inevitable once the pressurization failed and the crew did not respond within the critical window. The aircraft flew for nearly 4 hours after everyone aboard was incapacitated, watched by millions on television, escorted by fighter jets, a flying monument to the fragility of human life at high altitude and the unforgiving nature of hypoxia. This tragedy changed how we train pilots about hypoxia and pressurization failures, and the safety improvements that resulted have undoubtedly saved lives in the years since. If this story taught you something about aviation safety you did not know before, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more real aviation investigations. Give this video a like to help spread awareness about the dangers of hypoxia and the critical importance of immediate action when pressurization is lost. And share it with anyone interested in aviation, because understanding these tragedies is how we prevent them from happening again. Your engagement helps me continue bringing you these essential safety stories from the cockpit. I am Captain Paul Henderson. Thank you for staying with me through this tragic and difficult story. Remember that at high altitude, oxygen is not optional, it is life itself. Pressurization failure is an immediate emergency requiring instant action. Mask on first, questions later. Every second counts. Hesitation kills. Fly safe. Know the signs of hypoxia. Train in altitude chambers if you can, and always be prepared to act within seconds when pressurization is lost. Until next time, this is Captain Paul Henderson, signing off.